welcome to another session of AP Human Geography with Mr. Elrod. We're going to continue on in Unit 5 discussing agriculture and rural land use. Since we have discussed some of the different important time periods as it pertains to agriculture and agricultural practices and the development of agricultural technology, now we're going to move on to some of the specific agricultural practices that we find around the world and the way that we categorize them. So firstly, we have two primary categories or main umbrellas. Two main umbrellas of agricultural practices, and that's what's called subsistence agriculture and commercial agriculture. Our first conversation is going to revolve specifically around subsistence agriculture and those different forms of practices. So when we talk about subsistence agriculture, first of all, we are typically going to find subsistence agriculture in less developed nations. Either in less developed nations or even in those less developed nations, you tend to find it in specific parts of the country, more rural areas, people that are not connected to the larger either national economy or global economy. But again, either way, the subsistence agriculture is going to be for a very for a lifestyle that is on kind of the most basic of levels. And we'll talk more about that as we continue in terms of the technology and the things that are necessary to practice subsistence agriculture. And in that instance of subsistence agriculture, I mean, the term subsistence itself, it's describing a situation by which people are merely subsiding. They are merely kind of, not as, when we use the phrase maybe getting by, a particular idea may come to mind. When we say getting by, the idea there is that they're not really trying to make a profit. They're not growing and creating food and things like that to make a profit. They are growing food. They are raising animals to provide for themselves. Now, this doesn't mean they won't maybe trade with other farmers for things that they need, things along those lines, but their primary motive is not necessarily profit. Their primary motive is to provide for their family. When we talk about subsistence agriculture, in the kind of the larger umbrella, you have three subcategories of subsistence agriculture, and we have what's called shifting subsistence agriculture, we have what's called intensive subsistence agriculture, and then we have what's called pastoralism. And today, specifically, we're going to focus on shifting subsistence agriculture. In shifting subsistence agriculture, we can also refer to it as shifting cultivation. Now, just like the name implies, shifting cultivation is going to require the movement of the fields of the people from one place to another. Now, it's similar to the concept of the three-field system or field rotation that was used in Europe. And so basically the concept there is that you clear out, or you have your fields and you plant on certain fields, and then the next year you plant on your other two fields and leave the other one fallow. And the purpose of that is to allow the nutrients to be replenished in the field that you are allowing to remain fallow. Now, in shifting cultivation, or shifting subsistence agriculture, they'll plant on the same field or the same area for several years in a row, and then they'll move on to the next field. And a lot of that has to do with really the intense nature of the use of the land, the amount of labor that has to go into clearing the land, and things like that. So again, essentially, it's not a three-field system, but it's similar to that. The idea there is that the planting will be done on different fields for various years. So you rotate your fields so that the nutrients in the soil can be replenished. Now, it's important to note that the shifting subsistence agriculturalist is going to stay sedentary. They're going to stay in one place, and so the fields are going to shift around their homes. And so I think the number that I've seen given is they try to not come back to the same field for 20 years to allow the nutrients in the soil to be replaced. You tend to find the shifting cultivation in more tropical regions, tropical parts of Africa, the Amazon River regions, and then parts of Southeast Asia. Typically in areas that are much more tropical, something along the lines of tropical rainforest, those types of areas. Now, one of the reasons that you have the shifting cultivation and you have the movement of the fields is because of the very thin topsoil that exists in a lot of these tropical areas. And so with the clearing of the land, there's nothing to hold topsoil down, and so it's easy. Number one, the soil is very thin, so it doesn't have a tremendous amount of nutrients anyway. But then once you clear off the trees and the brush and things like that, there's nothing to hold the soil down, so it washes away or it gets used up by the plants, and so that can create kind of hazardous environmental situations, which is why the people in the shifting cultivation have to allow those fields to be replenished. Another term that's used for shifting cultivation is what's called slash and burn agriculture, because essentially that's what's going on. When the land is cleared, they slash down the heavy vegetation, which you see in this picture here. They cut it down, and then they burn that. And the reason you burn the field is to release the carbon and the other nutrients found in the plant and plant matter that you just cut down, release it into the soil. Kind of, it's a shock to the soil to give you some fertilizer for the soil as you're planting your crops. Now, this land that's been cleared and burned, this is what's called Swidden. So you also see it referred to as what's called Swidden agriculture. Again, it is incredibly labor intensive. There's very little to no mechanization used in this type of process, mainly because the people are too poor, but also the terrain is very difficult in order to use mechanized agriculture. And when I say large amounts of land, what I mean by that is the efficiency of the agricultural practice is very low. So you're using large amounts of land for very low yields, and so the problem with this type of agricultural practice is that it can only sustain smaller populations, which is why in this situation you're typically talking about providing for either a family group or a small tribal group, something along those lines. It cannot sustain large population. In slash and burn agriculture, some other characteristics we find is they tend to use a variety of different seeds and different crop varieties, and the purpose for this is to try and reduce the risk of crop failure. Just like we talked about earlier with the problem with monocultures, if you have several seed varieties, seed strands, but not only that, several different types of crops being planted, then you are much less likely to run into crop failure, because if one crop gets infected with some sort of disease or fungus or something along those lines, then it's more likely your other varieties are going to survive. Now, of course, there can be environmental issues that are associated with slash and burn agriculture. You can see how intensively the land is used. And the problem is that if it's used too intensely, if there's not enough room for them to move around because of environmental degradation, or if the population in their group rises too high because of improved medical technologies or any of those types of things, then it's entirely possible that they can overuse the land. If they overuse the land, then that means that the land's not going to have enough time to recover, which can cause permanent damage to the land, which means that the people are not going to be able to use that land anymore. So that's all the time that we have for today. When we come back next time, we're going to be talking about what's called intensive subsistence agriculture. So I hope you found that to be helpful, and I hope to see you next time.